I welcome you all to the Veritas Forum. This is part of the St. Dominic's Children's Home's 150th anniversary celebration. And that is certainly a cause for great celebration. And let me begin by introducing our keynote for this morning. So, Sister Arlene Greenidge is my friend and colleague, very proudly the manager of the St. Dominic's Children's Home, and she will be delivering the keynote this morning.
Okay, so good morning. Thank you for that introduction, Kerry. It is indeed wonderful to be here. As Kerry would have shared, St. Dominic's Children's Home is at the start of a one-year celebration. It's sesquicentennial, and thank you, Jackie, for that video that helps me to coach myself in pronouncing that word properly. Our sesquicentennial jubilee year. We were founded, St. Dominic's Children's Home was founded 150 years ago in 1871. And so we are celebrating that fantastic milestone in our history. The theme of our year celebration is 150 years of unbroken service, a time to rekindle, refresh, and recommit to the founding spirit. And so this event, this inaugural event, the launching of our Veritas Forum, is something that we trust will facilitate that rekindling, refreshing, recommitment, not just for ourselves here at St. Dominic's Children's Home, but for all of us practitioners, service providers, stakeholders, policymakers, planners, service, all of us who are involved in this adventure called residential childcare provision. So we're hoping that through this forum, we can create within this new dispensation a space where together we can do that. Because we know that as St. Dominic's Children's Home marches forward, we cannot do it alone. We really are in this together. So it is within the context of this Jubilee celebration and that theme that this, as I said, this inaugural session of our Veritas Forum is being held. And the topic that we're focusing on today is residential childcare within the new dispensation, challenges and opportunities. This morning at Mass, the gospel read, I just, it was so reassuring because it suggested to me that the heavenly host is in support of this gathering this morning. Because we read this morning at Mass, the gospel from St. Mark, 13th chapter. And verse 52, I found really struck me, really resonated with me as I prepared for this morning's session. In that verse, we're reminded that a disciple of the kingdom of heaven is like the owner of a house who brings out things both new and old. The disciple of the kingdom of heaven is like the owner of a house who brings out of his or her storeroom things both old, new and old. And I just found that image particularly appropriate for what we're doing today, because as we reflect on the future of residential childcare in this new dispensation, especially against the backdrop of our Jubilee celebration, it is an opportunity, this is an opportunity for us to bring out of our storeroom things both old and new and old. I want to share with us this morning our story here at St. Dominic's Children's Home and use that as a framework in which I do my own little piece in this space of study, reflection, and sharing. In just around 2008, we here at St. Dominic's Children's Home found ourselves experiencing a sense of growing discontent within our St. Dominic's Children's Home community. I remember, as I threw my mind back, how tedious staff meetings were at that time. You know, there was always so much full of, as I said, lots of dissatisfaction and discontent, lots of complaints. And there was also a growing sense amongst us that more and more we were meeting the needs of our children less and less. You know, so there too, I suppose that fed the discontent, because we all need to see all need to see flowers grow, you know. So that there was that sense, as I said, of growing discontent. And there were also the external push factors for something to happen. So something needed to be done. Because within the external environment, there was a lot happening in terms of legal reform. Circa 2000, we had already been consulting with the government around changes that were coming in the legislation, based on the fact that now you were now signatories of the conventions on the rights of the child. And so there was a lot of buzz, a lot of talk, meetings. And so there was also something happening within the external practice environment. And so experiencing the push from without and experiencing the uneasiness and dissatisfaction and push from within, our board of management at the time in 2008, September 2008 to be exact, decided that it was time to enter into a period of organizational change and transformation. And so we began our transformation process. There were a number of shifts as through study, consultation, conversations. There were a number of shifts that we were able to identify over time. There was a shift, for example, happening within the environment in terms of an understanding of trauma. It was a growing sense in which we were understanding the behaviors that we were seeing our young people and children presenting with in the context of trauma and loss. As we learned through the common sense parenting a little later, behavior has meaning, you know? And so the meaning that we were now ascribing to the loss of the behaviors that we were seeing with trauma and loss. Lots of mental health issues as well, noted in our young people as we began to do assessments. And so that was one of the shifts that we saw happening. We were now understanding the need in serving our children and young people to develop relationships that were trauma loss sensitive. We recognized that power and control wasn't going to do it for us. You know, exerting power over, that there was a need to use our power differently, the power of relationships. And that shift in an understanding of how power needed to be used was also consistent with the second shift that we were seeing within the environment. A lot of the change that were happening in the new dispensation that was unfolding was, as I mentioned before, within that legal frame. And so as we were now beginning to understand that children are human beings, you know, and as human beings, children have rights. And so as we began operating in an environment that was becoming more and more rights-based, again, we had to explore and take another look at the use of power within the childcare environment. And therefore, that too was leading us to the conclusion that really one of the shifts that had to be made was that shift from understanding ourselves as having power over our children to using that power to develop relationships, relations of influence and relationships that were trauma loss sensitive. There are many other shifts as well. One other observation we made is that children were not coming into the system at an older age. When I first came to work at St. Dominic's Children's Home, and that feels like eons ago, we had a nursery, you know, and I remember there must have been as many as 20 children, 15, 20 children in our nursery. We were seeing, however, that trend towards children coming at an older age, 5 years, 8 years old. And so as the age continued to move upward, there was also a need to engage our children and young people differently, especially within the child's rights context. There was now a need to engage them in a way that was participatory, We were learning that children needed to be included in decision-making insofar as those decisions impacted upon them. Children needed to be engaged in a manner that was age appropriate in making decisions and planning. And so that too was pushing for a different power dynamic in the relationship between caregiver and child, also between all the various stakeholders within the organization. And so observing these shifts and opening ourselves to what these shifts were now demanding of us, out of that whole dynamic, a new model of care, a new practice model emerged, the Steppers model. And so in 2014, we got permission from our ministry, from the government, to transition into this new model, this new practice model, the Steppers model. And so since 2014, St. Dominic's Children's Home has been struggling to roll out this new model. It soon became obvious to us, however, that the new model could not be effectively implemented within the existing organizational structure and within the current and within the existing governance structure. And so without going into a whole lot of details, read that in itself would take a whole morning. I would simply say that there was a misalignment observed between our organizational structure and governance model and this new practice model that we were seeking to implement. And so there too, we began another chapter. So in addition to rolling out the Steppers model, or rather implicit to rolling out the Steppers model, was the need now to reorganize, restructure the organization, and to negotiate with the government a new governance structure model. And so so as we speak about the new dispensation, these are some of the, in terms of the backdrop of the conversation, what we bring to the conversation this morning. This provides the backdrop, the organizational change and transformation of St. Dominic's Children's Home as we move into the Steppers model, full implementation of the Steppers model, a model that is strengths-based, a model that understands that we need to be trauma sensitive in our relationships, that our relationships cannot be built upon power and control, but we have to exercise, explore, develop other ways of using our power with power too. Understanding that our children need to have a voice, we need to hear their voices. One of the things that their voices have been saying to us is that we want family. I can't think of a single child who has come into care and who does not want to be either returned to family or who is not yearning for family. So that's another thing, that's a permanency, a sense that we now had to work towards reunification, reintegration into the family system, whether it was in the child's interest. So all of that is, again, part of the backdrop that we bring to the conversation this morning. One of the key pieces, as well, as we recognize how complex the delivery of residential childcare services was now becoming as a result, was that we recognize that residential childcare is a means, it wasn't the end. And therefore, we had to ensure that we provided a range of services, a menu of services, various kinds of intervention, so that we could meet the needs of the children and residents and young people receiving our care and the members of their family system, because that was now becoming part of, in order to meet that goal of permanency, of stability within a good enough family. We recognize now that our work wasn't simply with the child, but with the child and the members of his or her family system. And so we started talking about a continuum of services. And so this morning, as we gather for this forum, and as we look at the challenges and opportunities that exist within this new dispensation, we are also mindful of another thing, We are mindful that we are operating within a legal framework that is more pronounced, much more pronounced than we were used to in the previous or earlier dispensations. So I think if we are to locate this springboard for this new dispensation, this new time that we find ourselves in, it really has been the package. I alluded earlier to that external push of the legal framework that was being reformed, you know, and it's impossible for us to enter into this conversation without ensuring that we are mindful of this, that we are now operating heavily within a legal framework. And so at the center of that is the Children's Authority, the Children's Authority Act, that has really become a key stakeholder in the delivery of our residential childcare services. The Children's Authority is understood now as the guardian of the nation's children. When I first came to work at St. Dominic's Children's Home, I came on board as a welfare officer. And in representing the home at the family court in those days, you know, it was clear that the manager of the home was the child's guardian. And so that is one of the things that has changed within this new dispensation. We see now with the coming into being of the Children's Authority that the guardianship of the nation's children now falls to that Children's Authority. And the daily operations of the Children's Authority and its mandate is guided by a suite of new or amended children's legislation, the Children Act, the Children's Community Foster Care and Nurseries Act, etc. Also in terms of the legal framework, we have, I think in 2014, 2015, we have the establishment of the Children Court. And that Children Court has now brought us to treat with children's issues within 3 categories. So we're treating now with children's issues as it pertains to children who are in need of care and protection. That's one group. We are treating with children's issues as it pertains to children who are in need of supervision, children presenting with behavioral issues and who are in need of supervision. And we're treating with children's issues in the context of children who are in conflict with the law. And so these are some of the categories and some of the groupings that we too have to negotiate as within our various homes and institutions. We deliver services to children in difficult situations. And so that's a new dispensation in which we find ourselves operating. Key features of this dispensation, this new dispensation, as it pertains to the change and transformation work of St. Dominic's Children's Home, and I suspect, and I want to suggest, and I hope that to get some feedback on this in terms of my other colleagues in the field. One of the key features has been that shift in understanding the child. As I mentioned earlier, within this new dispensation, the notion of children as the subject of rights, it's rights-driven, child rights-driven. And there's this, and therefore, as practitioners, as residential childcare practitioners, as service providers, one of the features of this new dispensation that has been both a challenge and an opportunity is that the change in how we understand the child. To use the words of UNICEF, children are neither the property of their parents, nor are they helpless objects of charity. They are human beings and are the subject of their own rights. The Convention on the Rights of the Child sets out the rights that must be realized for children to develop to their full potential. So this is one of the key features of this new dispensation that we have been grappling with within the residential childcare setting. The new power dynamic between caregivers and children, that has been, for us, a major challenge, I would think, because of what I would describe as the retentions of early dispensations. You know, many of us grew up in communities and families, in settings where we would have heard, for example, children must be seen and not heard, right? And now we are told and we understand that children have a voice. Children must have a voice. We have to engage, and that word keeps coming up. We have to engage our children, we have to engage our young people. And that radical change in the power dynamic has been critical. And so that is one of the features that we want to lay before this forum today as we look at challenges and opportunities. What are the challenges and opportunities presented by this new way of understanding the child? Another feature, broader feature, is that we're operating at a time when there is growing connectivity. And maybe prior to the pandemic, the impact of this upon within the residential childcare setting might not have been pronounced as it is now. But as many of our children and young people now have to participate in learning, in being schooled online, you know, it means that our children and young people have growing, even within the residential childcare context, have growing access to social media and growing access to the internet. And so within our environment here, we have been seeing our children having that capacity, therefore, even to connect with each other, connect with their families. We have upped the supervision, of course, in terms of the internet use, but our children and young people, and I'm sure many of you are able to understand where I'm coming from, our children find a way. And so this growing connectivity is a key feature of this new dispensation that we also have to be mindful of, because it does provide us with opportunities, but also a whole lot of many challenges. The fact that people and things are more connected with one another than ever before, Twittering and Facebooking, etc., means that the world is behaving more and more as a living, dynamic, open system, instead of as a stable system from which conventional management logic developed, based on the experience of clear cause and effect relationships. I do not think I did justice to that quote from Pregonin and Kahane. So I'll repeat it. The fact that people and things are more connected with one another than ever before means that the world is behaving more and more as a living, dynamic, open system, instead of as the stable system from which conventional management logic developed, based on the experience of clear cause and effect relationships. So that simple dualistic cause and effect way of thinking is becoming less and less helpful to us in this new dispensation, because one impact of this new feature, this broad feature of growing connectivity within this new dispensation, one impact that it has made upon the system is that the systems have become more dynamic. Our systems are open and living, you know, and so the issues that have become more complex because there are now so many multiple factors, multiple positions and perspectives that have to be considered. Within the literature, particularly within the management literature, that concept, therefore, of emergence is becoming increasingly employed because that concept allows us to enter into a reality and a deeper understanding of the growing complexities with which our various communities and institutions and organizations and societies are confronted. Emergence is defined as the way living systems grow and evolve and refers to bottom-up approaches within open dynamic systems. So again, as I throw items into the pot, as we study and reflect and discuss the challenges and opportunities, this emergence is this concept of our emerging realities. You know, what are the conflicts, the opportunities and the challenges that reality offers to us. Here within St. Dominic's Children's Home, that experience of emergence, of new systems emerging, a new organization emerging has been our reality. As we look at so many of the things we put in place here at St. Dominic's Children's Home, we see that those things have unfolded, they've emerged. And because they have emerged sometimes in a manner that is pretty organic, it means that the shape, you know, the structure doesn't exist. So we have a lot of systems in place, we have interventions in place, we're talking about a continuum of care, but what are they supporting? What's the infrastructure? What are the policies? You know, what are they? So as we enter this morning into our forum, that too is something I hope would feature in our conversations. How are we experiencing this phenomenon of the emergence? You know, how are we experiencing this concept of the emergence in our own reality? And what are the challenges that is presenting, and what are the opportunities? I think my time is just about up. So just to reframe, as we move into our Veritas forum this morning, we are mindful that we are now operating within a new dispensation in which we operating in a heavy legalistic or legal framework. We understand that the Children's Authority is the guardian of the child. We understand that the children have a voice. We understand that we're operating in the context of connectivity, growing connectivity. And we understand that all of this provides us with a wealth of opportunities, all kinds of opportunities for new relationships, for new ways in delivering our services. But it also presents us with a number of various challenges. And so together, we are trusting that through this forum and through the call to action that we hope will come at the end, that we will embrace at the end of this forum, we pray that we may come to a place where we are able to build upon the opportunities, and where together we are better and more effectively able to grapple with the challenges. So thank you.
Thank you very, very, very much, Sister Arlene, for that stimulating, really brilliant, let me just say, brilliant overview of the situation, you know, interweaving history, as well as that nexus for change, as well as the realities of the time in which we currently find ourselves. And I want to just end, you know, where you, I want to highlight the importance of the last things that you said. Everything was just absolutely really well laid out. And if any of us were here this morning not knowing what we were here for, well, Now we know exactly what we're here for, why we're here, and why we need to be here. You know, the root word of emergency is emergence. So possibly emergencies or an emergency is really an opportunity for us to look again and for us to build from the ground up, to go back sometimes to the drawing board. And so when we think of emergencies as crises, we could also think about them as evolutions of emergence, if one can say that. Something else that you said before that really resonated with me. I mean, I worked in St. Dominic's Home 20 years ago, in a time when changes had just, it was evident that we needed. At that time, there were 260 children. When I came to St. Dominic's Home, there were like 260, 270 children in the home. And it was obvious then that there were things happening that needed to be done differently. And, you know, being part with you as part of those early conversations about some of these changes, I'm really excited to see how this has gone and where it's gone. So thank you again for that. One of the things you said earlier, and I think it is something that we can certainly use in the conversation, is that reunification, family reunification, family reintegration is the child's right. Maybe it's our children, if we see it as a right of the children, it is certainly their need and their desire, but possibly if we looked at it as a right. So, so a lot of things, a lot of items highlighted in this conversation, and I really thank you on behalf of the audience, as well as on behalf of the home and all of us who know the home, for those insights. So colleagues, thank you. Remember, please, to put your comments in the chat. Katisha is there waiting to moderate the chat and to share any questions that you have. We will answer questions towards the end, after all of the presentations have been completed. So put your questions in so that you don't forget them as we go. So thank you again. So we move on now to our second speaker, but first guest presenter for this morning, Jacqueline Barksdale. Jacqueline is a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Florida. She spent most of her career as a certified child welfare professional, providing both direct care and program management, but she states her favorite role is that of trainer for parents, staff, and other clinical interests. She recently retired from her position as clinical director of a therapeutic foster care program, providing behavioral services to children with mental health and medical needs. As a therapist, Jackie is credentialed in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, adoption competency for mental health professionals, infant mental health, the MAP leadership and Boys Town models, nationally rostered in child-parent psychotherapy, and certified in various training curricula. Since 2004, Jackie has been closely working with St. Dominic's Children's Home in their creation of the Steppers model, complying with the new Children's Authority licensing requirements and maintaining quality residential standards. She first presented at the International Social Work Conference, in Trinidad, and since then she has made several trips to provide child welfare consultation and training. Congratulations to Sister Arlene, the staff and stakeholders on the Jubilee on their Jubilee, and in offering 150 years of unbroken service to the children and families of Trinidad and Tobago. And so with that short introduction, I welcome Jacqueline Barksteel.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? And I'll say good morning from sunny Florida, where it's a lovely 42 degrees here. It's sunny, yet cold. I know that John Sheets and Neil Abel can attest to that. So I am happy to be inside. I am going to put up some PowerPoints and hopefully, let's see. Can everybody see those?
Not yet. You need to share screen.
I did share the screen.
Try again, click on share screen and then connect and then click on the
Share screen. And here we go. How about that?
now. Yes. Thank
Good.
you very much.
Thank you.
And if you click on slideshow, we'll see it right up close.
All right. I am going to flip through these slides. I appreciate so much the opportunity to present 100 years of unbroken service. And I think that leads right into what we're going to talk about, or I'm going to talk about today, in presenting a continuum of care in the child welfare context. To bridge back to what Sister said, St. Dominic's Children's Homes has been working steadily at good practice. Their steppers model is there. Their individual care plans. John and I have been down, and I've continued to work with Petra and the other clinicians on the holistic individual care plans for children, treatment plans and service plans, and that's rolling out. And the last thing Sister talked about was the continuum of care. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start right here. And I want to, again, thank everybody for the opportunity to pull up a chair and sit at the table with each one of you who've come from different perspectives, but with the heart for child welfare. And I'm glad and honored to be here. So I do want it to be more of a conversation and not so much as a lecture. So I will be flipping through some of these slides rather quickly. If I can change one thing in that program, the continuum of care, the right service at the right time. I think it might have said and the right time, but what is that right service for each child, and when is the right time? Nestled right into St. Dominic's Children's Home's mission statement to provide services along a continuum of care, promoting permanency and holistic development for children in difficult situations. In that mission statement, I see two things. I see the safety and I see the well-being. And to recap or to summarize what I heard Sister Arlene said was those two have to go hand in hand. Safety is not the end, or the means. That we absolutely want to get children to safe situations, but we don't want to lose any opportunity for growth or child development, and they can work hand in hand. Thus, we'll move forward with the continuum of care. There's their steppers model. I know that they have worked hard on that. And a continuum of care definition. It is linked, it is maintained, it is sustained. It involves planning and management, care coordination, or service delivery. It must be child-driven. And the linkage that we've also talked about this morning, as opposed to a silo, or all the benefits that we'll see with that. The purpose, of course, we all want a shared vision, don't we? We all want to see that. And yet, looking at the individual needs of each child. We have a mandate. There's several mandates that have changed throughout the years, and the mandate for individual care plans, for children's rights, but also that we translate these broad principles, that there are goals and objectives for each child. And so here is our mandate that works, again, hand in hand, that we've got the steppers model integrated at each. We know what our population is. We are always evaluating our care. And the importance. We want quality and we want consistent care. Services are rendered without gaps or duplication. That's very important. Sometimes we have to outsource services, dental or speech therapy, things we might not provide in-house. We need those wraparound services. Goal achievement. Without recidivism, absolutely. You know, that if we do make a plan for permanency, for reintegration, that family is better and we are wrapping that family so they don't have to come back into the child welfare system. Our continuum is going to work within the boards and regulation and all the authorities that we've mentioned. And this is one that we're continuing to work with St. Dominic's, is looking at a technology integration. You know, that might streamline services. If you've got an intake into one program, the child's already admitted or the family's admitted into common sense parenting, how do we use that information in the therapy for the child? And so we want to do that confidentially. And we also want to have more linkage for time management, of course. Move down a little bit more. I believe it was in 2017, I came down for a consultation workshop. We did training for direct care staff in the morning, and in the afternoon, we were trying to define what is a continuum of care. And it looks like, oh gosh, we have to invent one. But then in listening to the group and asking people what they did, people would say, well, I teach parenting classes, or I do education classes. I work with the children once they've been reintegrated and make home visits. And I thought, well, there's your continuum. So like Sister said, you pull out the old with the new and the new with the old. And we wrote down a lot of things that we were doing and thought, we do have a continuum of care. We have a continuum that happens in overlap time. For example, if a child is in residential care, the parents can be receiving common sense parenting or intervention services. They're involved in the visitation center. So it's not that one stops and one starts, but how do we integrate that continuum? And so we looked at the community programs, which we call prevention, assessment and intervention, kinship and foster care, in-home services, and quality residential care. And even within those 5 programs that we vetted out specific to St. Dominic's, there are least restrictive and more restrictive within each one of those. Maybe a child needs therapy twice a week. Maybe another child needs therapy with his family just once a month. And so we're looking at what is the least restrictive and most restrictive and still keep that permanency and that child well-being in the forefront. So that's what we did. We read them out, or what from the least restrictive to the most restrictive. And this is from a programmatic standpoint that, and you can look at this specific, for example, in community, we have the Shalom Center. We have partnerships in parenting. We have common sense parenting. And so we have all the different programs. And so where are we and how do we fit the child into these? And there we look at prevention, intervention, and treatment. So look what's been accomplished and where do we go from here? And thank you for letting me rewind a little bit on what a continuum is. It's so important that we have common language. I know that we come from different disciplines or we have a different role in the system. And I just wanted to spend at least 5 minutes on really looking at what a continuum of care is, not just for St. Dominic's Children's Homes, but also for child welfare. And here we have the model of care, the good practice model of care, and the Steppers program is at every level for consistency. That's that language that we have the same values and respect, and each level that we have the same model used. I mentioned before, we go from least or less restrictive placements to more intensive programs. And these are client focused, they're family focused. Sister Arlene spoke a lot about the rights of the child and how important that is for the family as well. The right service at the right time. Sometimes that might come from the court. It might come from child welfare. It might come from in-house as identified in an initial assessment. A biopsychosocial, so important, that we get that information, that we get it timely. Sometimes we are working, we're on a track with a child, and then we uncover some information that would have been critical to have at the initial assessment, because that will determine the level of intervention that this child needs. The individualized care plan, they've made so much progress in this and looking at either a service plan or a treatment plan for each child, that these are strength-based. They're geared for success. Let's set that child up for success. Let's set that family up for reunification. And if not with the biological parents, kinship, I know is rolling out. So we want to look at kinship care or however that child can be best met. That there is a seamless, not only with the consistency, but a child can move up and down, up and down. The family can move up and down in the continuum of care, that it's measurable. How do you know when a child or a family is ready to step down? I think just like we spend a lot of time at initial assessment, for those who have worked in hospital settings or the day a child or a client is admitted, that's the day they start discharge planning. What is the aftercare plan? What would it look like if we said we want to step down this child? What wrap would be there to maintain their success? Evaluation requires all of us. And it's hard. Sometimes it's like cowboys and Indians because we see the child from a different perspective in looking at evaluation. A treatment plan might say the child's ready for discharge when they meet 80% of their targeted goals. But maybe there's another means for evaluation, and it's so important that the child care staff and the treatment staff and even the program staff are all at the table. But look at that next one. Who's gonna say when they're ready to step down? Who's the center at this table? And that would be the child and the family. We have a term here that's called nothing about me without me. And children know that. Children know their rights, and they will tell you what their rights are. But how important is it to put that family and that child at the center of directing their care and directing their permanency plan when we have safety and permanency at the forefront? Collaboration with other providers. We need good communication. We need to trust each other, trust and respect their disciplines, and that they come from different eyes and different programs to do so, that we can share data safely and respectfully. And so these are some things that I can see where St. Dominic's and the child welfare system is making progress. There are some things such as the communication and data, we're working on that right now, that still need to be vetted out. And thank you. I know I've gone very quickly through these, and here we are, questions. And so I appreciate that there's a chat room in order to do so. If anybody has a question about the slides or some of the definitions, I hope they can be shared and made available should anybody want to see them. Thank you very much. And again, congratulations on all the hard work everybody's done.
Thank you very much, Jackie, for that very clear, very concise presentation. I think there are a couple of things about the continuum of care that I think resonated a little bit in what you shared. One is the importance of having the child and the family at the center. Possibly we make some sad and difficult assumptions sometimes about the capacity of people to engage in their own care planning and permanency planning because they are in difficult circumstances. And how do we kind of pull in, and engage their whatever their levels of resilience as well as capacity are in the process. So, wherever, in social workers amongst us know this inside out. Begin where our client is and not expect them to meet us where we are, and how important that is. I think also what is really key is what you said right up at the beginning, which is that even if the language is new, continuum of care, steppers, some of the other concepts that you use, I can't think of right now, the resources are available within our settings and within our context. Sometimes people balk at, sometimes models that come from abroad. We hear people fight down, the introduction of things that are that have a source that is outside of ourselves, but many times it's just putting a different language to what we already have and what we're already doing. So I really appreciated that starting point where you started with that, and I thank you. I remind everyone, please, questions, comments in the chat. Katisha is waiting to pull them, and later on, Jackie, we certainly will have I'm sure some questions that give you a chance to discuss those. So colleagues, we are right on time and moving smoothly along to our third presentation, our second speaker after Sister Arlene, and that is John Sheets. John is served as a Peace Corps volunteer on youth development in Ukraine shortly after the Orange Revolution. To gain clinical skills and a perspective on American policy, John returned to Florida State University to pursue a master's in social work degree. He studied child welfare, emergency preparedness, and refugee services. He conducted research on pain, opioids, and mindfulness. After graduation, John became a therapeutic foster care trainer before pursuing consulting on child welfare services. This work has involved training new managers across the Panhandle, teaching child protective investigators about mental health, and developing evidence-based foster care programs for lead and contract agencies. John has continued international child welfare work in Trinidad with the St. Dominic's Children's Home. John and his wife, Becca, also served as foster parents in Tallahassee, and all of the children placed in their home transitioned to the permanent place they want to be. And John's presentation, Child Welfare, Finding New Branches by Exploring Our Roots. Let us welcome John.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we're hearing you clearly.
Thank you. So it's great to see some familiar faces and names. I had the opportunity to visit there with Jackie on that trip in 2017. And just real quick, for those of you that may remember, I was expecting a little girl then. So there she is. It's unbelievable. She is 2.5 now. We've heard some really great speakers so far and some really big ideas. And so I thought at this point in the program, it might be good to take a minute to ground ourselves just a little bit. So we're going to do that with some box breathing. Now is the time if you need to stretch, if you want to turn off your camera, if you need to grab another cup of coffee or run to the bathroom, this would be a great moment to do that. But think about where you are in the room, okay? So get comfortable in your chair, maybe plant your feet on the ground. If you're standing, feel that support beneath you. Feel the chair, feel the legs, feel your feet on the ground. And we're going to take a couple deep breaths. So you should be able to see an image up on the screen. Jump in whenever you feel ready, but it's going to tell you to hold your breath for 4 seconds, then to breathe in for 4 seconds, hold that in breath for those 4 seconds, and then breathe out for 4 seconds. So this is the time where we're going to do a little bit more audience participation. So again, if you'd like to, you can feel free to turn off your camera, close your eyes. We're just going to do a couple of these cycles. So if the image is delayed, feel free to follow my voice or to follow the image, whichever is more relaxing. So breathe in, hold, and breathe out. Hold. Breathe in, hold, and breathe out. Hold. Breathe in, hold, breathe out. Hold. Breathe in, hold, and breathe out. Hold. One more. Breathe in, hold, breathe out. I'll leave that image up there, but you can also leave your eyes closed. And I want you to picture a scene with me. I want you to imagine that you're walking outside. The temperature is very pleasant. You're moving along. Maybe you're walking in the forest, similar to the scene behind me. Maybe you're in a park or your own backyard. Maybe you're walking through the orchard there at the Belmont campus. Or maybe your way of moving is not on land, but through the water. Paddling, perhaps through a mangrove forest. Take a minute, look around you. What do you see? What do you hear? Are there critters moving through the forest? Lizards, crabs? Do you hear birds in the trees? Do you feel the breeze on your skin? Maybe you feel the sunlight coming through the leaves of the trees. As you're moving along, you come to a large tree. It commands your presence in front of you. You feel comfortable in the shade of the tree. You notice that being there near the tree makes you feel safe. As you look down, you see huge roots reaching out from the tree, grounding it. You can smell the fresh earth. But you notice, although the tree has a very full canopy, the trunk isn't round. It's almost triangular. It has 3 distinct faces, and you rub your hand across the bark. Feel that each of those 3 faces. You notice as you look up that this old tree has many scars. It has stunted branches. But yet it has a full canopy and full of life. Take a minute, look around you, save that image. Remember this tree. Take a deep breath, and when you're ready, open your eyes. So why did I want to start with that activity? There's a couple reasons, and I love audience participation, so feel free to drop things in the chat if you have an answer to that question. But first, we all come from very diverse backgrounds. We're in very diverse locations, and I believe strongly that the work we all do is based on relationship, and relationship is often based on shared experiences. So I wanted to give us a moment this morning to have a shared experience. Sometimes we can look for shared experiences in the people we know, but if we cannot, then perhaps we can create them. So I wanted to give a small example of that. I also think it's very easy for us to get caught up in the chaos of this type of work. Most of the people we come in contact with, we're meeting them on one of the worst days of their lives. And it's easy for us to take that in and to operate in that chaos. And so I also think that it's important for us to demonstrate the calm that we want to bring into the world. If we want the world to be a stable place, we need to be an influence of that stability. And so I think it's always important for us to take a minute to step back and ground ourselves in that calm and stability. And then the last reason was the most practical. I couldn't figure out a way to create an image that gave you the idea of what I wanted to talk about here this morning. So I thought I'd let you create it for yourself in your own mind. So that tree is important for my last few minutes. I work mostly with professionals, so that offers different opportunities and challenges, right? And so I want to make sure that we can take some of those images as we go forward. So if you think about that tree and you think about our speakers so far, sometimes it's easiest to start where we are, right? So think about that trunk of the tree. I said there were 3 sides to that trunk, right? 3 planes as it reached up into the sky. I want you to think of those 3 planes as one being the physical impact on us, on our children, on our environment that often gets portrayed in behaviors. Another face I want you to think of as the cognitive influence, right? Our thoughts. So we have behaviors, the physical, we have our thoughts, and the third face is the emotional, the social, the spiritual, the feelings that we have inside of us. All 3 are very important. All 3 make up who we are and how we interact with the world. And all 3 need to be recognized. The thoughts, the feelings, and the behaviors. If we neglected one of those planes, our tree would grow off to the side, right? It would be not well supported. And so we want to make sure that we're recognizing all 3 of those. In preparing for this talk, looking through history, I don't feel that we have always looked at all 3 of those in that holistic approach. But as Sister mentioned today, that is something that we're going forward with strongly. That Stepper's model, it has deep roots, each of those letters, you know, being strength-based, being evidence-based, recognizing the spiritual, recognizing the rights. Those are those roots I was talking about that go deep into the ground. That's where we are now, but they reach back. And the other place where Jackie spoke that we are now is this continuum of care. How do we best support all of these areas, the physical, the emotional, the cognitive, in order to have the most success? Empowerment is important to that, seeing the client where we are. But when we think down into the ground, into those roots, what are those major roots? There's lots, right? Some are going to be bigger, some are smaller. We have much better understanding of attachment theory today. That is a root. We used to move kids regularly in child welfare because we didn't want them to get too attached. We understand that's not healthy anymore. So that root has grown stronger. We have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have trauma-informed care and being trauma sensitive and recognizing how does that affect the architecture of our tree, the structure. And then when we look back historically, we have the differences between church services and government services. And we see in St. Dominic's how those two have come together to work together. They don't have to be exclusive, but public and private historically have exercised much different influences onto our child welfare system. We also have conflicting feelings in universal provision of service versus means tested. And there have been shifts over time where things have become more universal or more means tested. So that's another one of those routes. And then where the intervention happens, is that happening at an individual level, at a family level, at a societal level? But one of the biggest roots, I think, down there is funding. How do we pay for the services we provide? And we've seen just in St. Dominic's 150-year history, quite some differences in funding from private citizens, from fundraisers, from government. That's true when I look at the other agencies that I've worked with, orphanages in Ukraine, facilities here in Florida. Funding has changed over time, but it's important to think about, particularly because if we look up to the branches, we think about where are we going, where can we explore, what's still growing. I think funding has a lot of effect on that. And so here in the United States, in Florida, our funding is shifting. We had some major legislation that passed in 2018 that is shifting funding from more intervention services to more prevention services. And we're seeing that play out. And I think one of the reasons I was asked to speak today is because these things, although child welfare is inherently a local issue, it happens with a child in a family, it's also a universal issue. We see it in all of our different communities. And so I want to make sure that although some of the things I may be speaking of speak to maybe more specific to one area than another, these are international trends. They're not universal, but we're seeing bigger pictures and we're noticing that we're not alone. And sometimes that's hard to remember. When you stand in a forest, there's one tree, but if you look out, there's a forest of trees. And so make sure that we're remembering that we have strength in numbers, that we're not all experiencing these problems alone. But when we look up to those branches, funding, it's one of those roots, but it's going to change the way the canopy looks, the way the branches fan out, right? And one of the major things is that historically it's been very difficult to secure funding for prevention services, because when you have done prevention well, you have no outcomes to show. And so that's much harder to capture, much harder to report in data. We're getting better at it, and we're becoming more conscious about the ways we're doing evaluation. So I think that is really one fantastic route. That's where evidence-based comes in the Steppers model. We're also really looking at those prevention services. How can we prevent people from needing an intervention? And one of the ways that we're doing that more and more is bringing in lived experience. So who are the people that have gone through this system before? Who are the kids that have become adults and had children themselves? Do they have feedback into the way that we're building this structure? I think that is becoming more and more of a trend. As Jackie mentioned, nothing about me without me. So are we making sure that we have the people that this is about at the table? And that involves a lot of strong feelings. This work involves a lot of strong feelings. So making sure that we're using reflective practice. Michelle is going to speak more about that in a little bit, but making sure that we're paying attention to our supervisors, that they have the means to process through these difficult interactions, that they can help their people, and then through the parallel process that can be taught down to parents and to children, to make sure that we're using that reflective supervision, that reflective practice to build up everyone's skills all along the process. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is that I think another branch that we will see more and more impact this work is virtual reality. So here we are all gathered together from multiple different locations, and these are just little boxes. But the day is coming where we will put on a headset and be able to interact in a room all together, despite being across different distances. Right now, I'm working with a team at Florida State on a project just like that to help people practice their skills, their active listening, their engagement skills, their crisis de-escalation skills. So, for example, I could be in a room, I can play a parent who right here in Florida could possibly pull a gun on someone. And in this simulation, I could do that. And this person could work and practice to de-escalate the situation without any danger to them. And thank goodness, without any danger to me, because I would never pull a mock gun in a real simulation for fear of the consequences for myself. So this virtual reality and augmented reality, I think, are really going to change the way we train and the way we can practice some of these skills. And I think that is very close to the horizon. It's out there already. I've been surprised at the level of sophistication. It's not widespread yet, but the cost is not that prohibitive. And so I think what we're working on is developing labs around the state of Florida where people can use that physical hardware, but just as a means to more sophisticated training. And I think we're going to see that more and more. The last thing, just piggybacking on Jackie and Sister's comments, we are seeing better parenting. We're seeing better social skills. But again, there's always a pendulum swing. And so one of the other sides of that coin is social media. Social media is generally not reciprocal. There are different power dynamics involved. And so I see that as one of our biggest obstacles moving forward. As Karine mentioned, my background in child welfare started as a Peace Corps volunteer. I'm very much of a community development mindset. And so how do we build more community? Social media, I think, is going to continue to kind of erode that community. People feel that it's a connection, but is it a strong connection? And so how do we make sure that we're continuing to build community that is reciprocal, that does involve that lived experience, that can make us all stronger and really create a better future? Because the end is, as I said, I work with a lot of professionals, and there's often a lot of finger pointing involved. And really, we all want the same thing. We all want what is best for the child, what is best for the family. We may have different opinions about how we get there. And so when it gets tough, I want you to think back, close your eyes, take a deep breath, remember that tree, okay? Remember that moment of calm, and how can you bring that calm in? Because trees aren't built in grand gestures. We don't put big chunks of tree on top to build a giant tree that we feel safe under in the forest. We build those one leaf at a time, right? And so sometimes that seems daunting, but if we can be that one leaf to help that journey move forward, then I think that's what we're called to do. And I always like to end by saying thank you. I think the work that you do is very difficult work and very important work. And often the community doesn't recognize that. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of today, and thank you for the work that you do every day.
Thank you very much, John, for that visualization to start us off in this presentation, and that was important. And it's also important that your background is also perfect for that visualization, because I kind of imagine myself in the trees there in your background, in the back there. So that was quite appropriate. So thank you for that. And in doing so, you reminded us of the importance of self-care, which we always talk about and over talk about sometimes in our professions. But I think you simplified it so beautifully by saying that it is about how we create a sense of calm within ourselves, find ways to create that so that we bring that to situations which may be anything but calm. And how we create a sense of stability, and by so doing, create a sense of competence and confidence in our own abilities to be able to support and to help through this process. You talked a lot about finances, and I do note already that we have a question about finances and about resources and how we actually how do we actually implement and execute some of these plans. The importance of understanding the roots, because one of the things I just came up with off the top of my head, that how the tree grows depends on the soil and the depth of the roots, etc. So there may be some differences in where the roots are, but nonetheless they are no less important. So thank you for those visuals. I think I think the visualization and the understanding, and I'm a kind of trees person myself. I'm always painting and drawing trees, and that being understanding the you know, how the tree grows, you know, is dependent on so many different factors, and we do have to pay attention to them. So so thank you so much, John. The last thing that you said, and I noted it, about the tendency in a complex system and the system around trauma-informed care with children in difficult circumstances is complex, that we unfortunately do fall into, especially in multidisciplinary settings, we do fall into finger pointing. And you know, another term for that is culture blaming. Sometimes we get into culture blaming as well. When people begin to feel a little unsure of what they are doing and the impact of what they are doing, we can fall into that sense that somebody else, and it just speaks to, I think, it just speaks to our own sense that this issue is so huge and it's impossible for us to actually address it. So unfortunately, that finger pointing can actually come from a sense of the largesse of the issue that we're dealing with. So I thanks to John. I know we already have a couple of questions coming through in the chat, and we will certainly get a chance to discuss them a little bit later on. So we keep moving, and I think we're doing fairly well so far, even in terms of time, as we go. So we move on now to our next speaker, Dr. Neil Abel. Dr. Abel is a professor and director of international programs at the School of Social Work at the Florida State University. He received his PhD and MSW from Florida State. As an international programs director, he has coordinated placement of social work interns in agencies ranging from the Eastern Caribbean to the UK, the Republic of Ireland, South Africa, and Canada. His teaching abroad includes HIV courses in Vietnam and the UK, and courses in international social work and criminal justice in the Czech Republic. His research and consultation has included confronting HIV/AIDS in the Eastern Caribbean, Barbados, Jamaica, Grenada, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines. Supported in part by the Florida Association for Volunteer Action in the Caribbean and the Americas, FAVOCA. Recent efforts explore the transfer of mindfulness principles framed in the Awareness Acceptance Action Model to compassionate social service engagement in the context of sectarian conflict. Working with community and academic partners in Northern Ireland, he seeks to integrate these ideas with theories of identity and reflective and anti-oppressive practice into training modules for social work students and practice learning teachers. Dr. Abel's presentation this morning, Speaking Truth to Ourselves and Others as we navigate the COVID-19 era. So I welcome Dr. Abel.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And let me just say what a joy it is to have the opportunity to join this panel in service of the long-term, very dedicated and compassionate work that St. Dominic's has anchored for so many years in Trinidad and Tobago. I have been listening and learning with delight to all three of these former speakers, and I'll try to integrate just a bit if I can as I turn to my own remarks here. I'm going to be addressing another contextual factor that we might think of in some ways as the elephant in the room, the pandemic of COVID-19, and looking at the ways in which the lessons we are challenged to learn now are in relation to lessons we've had the opportunity to learn in the past, and I'll elaborate as I go. I'm also inspired this morning partly by the imagery that John has created, to share a note of encouragement from Paul Haller, who is the abbot at the San Francisco Zen Center in California, who encourages all of us as we work to create what he refers to as a benevolent ecosystem, both internally and externally. And in saying so, he's meaning that we have the opportunity to recognize that all the trees in the forest are themselves interconnected, both through their roots and through their branches and through the energy of life that they exchange between themselves. And in a way, so are we. So speaking truth to ourselves and others as we navigate the COVID-19 era is inspired in part by Sister Arlene having introduced me very recently to the notion of Sankofa, which originates with the Akan tribe in Ghana. And it is meant to represent this lovely picture of the bird going back to retrieve an egg that it had forgotten. And it translates as, it is not taboo to go back and fetch what you forgot. And so my key point at the beginning here is, what do we have to remember? For me, I am very happy to remember 20 years of collaboration with St. Dominic's, and not all of that is in my own lead role. My predecessor, Patricia Lager, also introduced us at Florida State University to the opportunity to collaborate with St. Dominic's. And although this is a mere fraction of the 150 years that we celebrate today, we have laid a strong foundation, and that has been based on a commitment to mutual respect and shared learning with each other, both in the evolution of children's services in Trinidad and Tobago and in the training of future service providers. And St. Dominic's has been instrumental in providing training opportunities for many of our social work students. But I want to reach back and say that we also have the opportunity to remember the experience of the lessons learned within and the challenges still to be met by the HIV/AIDS pandemic. I've worked for approximately 25 years in this regard, and the image that you see of the heart embraced within the teardrop and the open eye is meant to respect the challenge that all of us commit to when we agree to look directly into the suffering of others in the world around us and to not look away, but to hold our gaze. And in so doing, acknowledge that we are exposed to the risk of suffering ourselves, but also as the new life emergent in the heart in this image illustrates, to the growth and rebirth of new ways of being and new ways of encountering ourselves and others in the world. HIV was early in its emergence proclaimed to be the great equalizer, in that the virus didn't care about the differences that we otherwise sometimes treated as so important in our interactions across communities, across race, across gender, across faith. And the darkest side of this has haunted us for generations. It's not new to the context of HIV, but HIV, hearkening back to Sister's earlier points, was another trigger for an opportunity for us to see the way we experienced our differences in a more vivid and clear light. If we were tending to treat people that we viewed as immoral or irresponsible, as the other, as somehow to blame for the illness that was cast upon them, we were ultimately hampering our abilities to find a way forward in the presence of a virus that never made such distinctions to begin with. And so we worked early in the pandemic, including in the Eastern Caribbean, to support social welfare and nursing staff to understand their fears in relation to engaging with a deadly virus, and also their opportunities to reach beyond that, to test their assumptions, and to learn how to be more compassionate as a result. So what might we go back and fetch from this era of the HIV pandemic, which I sadly must remind us is not yet entirely past, although the scenario is now much better than it was a generation ago. One thing we may go back and fetch is our commitment to the training and service that distinguishes our biased assumptions and irrational fears from the actual experiences and the rights and needs of those that we serve. All of us who aspire to be of service take on a high challenge, but we do so as mere humans. We are not immune from the suffering, from the fears, from the anxieties, or the challenges that infect our societies at large. And we have to work diligently to separate fiction from truth and fact from fallacy. And some of these principles can be enhanced if we recall major components of mindfulness, which again, some of my speaker friends earlier this morning have already touched on. Looking deeply, listening well, and practicing compassion for ourselves and others when we come up short of our expectations. And this means adopting the humility to learn, not only about our own humanity, and this is that benevolent ecosystem within, but also about the dignity and worth of those with, and I should say for whom, we work. The awareness acceptance action model is built on the foundation of looking deeply into our own experiences and seeing them as they actually are, rather than as we imagine them to be. And listening well to what we hear and experience from others regarding their fears and their concerns, so that we encounter them not as a stereotype, not as yet another family member challenged with tendencies to be angry or neglectful, but as a fully formed human being, deserving of our attention and concern. And when we find bias in ourselves or others at the awareness level, that we accept, first of all, the implications of those. If I carry this feeling unaddressed, if I allow myself to bury it rather than embrace it and seek to understand it, what will the implications be for my ability to deliver the ethical care to which I aspire? And on that platform of awareness and acceptance, can I then choose to act intentionally rather than reactively? And this may go back to Sister's notion that we don't always draw on notions.
No.
I know someone else's microphone is on.
Sorry about that, Neil.
It's okay. We also can remember what we know about the drivers of social inequity and vulnerability. This is critical now as we work with the pandemic, about the risk that traumatized individuals and families and communities can act out their suffering in ways that bring severe consequences on themselves and their children. And what we know now is that COVID-19, as we bring this into the future and into the present, is carrying forward some of the worst of HIV, but in some ways reminding us to act on the best of what we have had the opportunity to learn. Paul Farmer and Jonathan Mann, both famous contributors to public health in the context of infectious disease throughout the Caribbean and the US, observed that suffering and death always fall disproportionately on the vulnerable and the oppressed. Those who were marginalized in the beginning will bear the biggest consequences. And we see this, unfortunately, in this new era of COVID, reducing a 20-year trend of the reversal of extreme poverty. And so now we expect by 2030 for there to be 50 million more people under severe poverty than we would have expected otherwise. And this job loss, this decline in tourism and productivity is rippling across all of our societies with implications for the families that we engage. Families that are in varying degrees of lockdown, isolation, enforced distancing, quarantining, cutting themselves off further from the communities and loved ones whom they would otherwise turn to for support when schools are closed, when we have conflict about vaccines, and people living in broad ways in a context of fear. Carissa Etienne at PAHO has said, many women have been forced to leave their jobs to care for their families during this pandemic, impacting both their income and their well-being. And ongoing stay-at-home measures coupled with added economic strains are increasing the risks of domestic violence. For far too many, home is not a safe space. Service provision is exceptionally challenged in this broadly traumatized era. People are acting out, including those of us who provide care, in ways that challenge our ability to clearly maintain the professional and personal boundaries that IFSW has encouraged us to aim for. We see that service provision is challenged when we are unwilling or unable to meet people in their homes or communities or bring them into our own settings without fear of being exposed or becoming ill. Treating others equitably is more difficult. Antonio Guterres at the WHO has written, the COVID-19 is a public health emergency, but it is far more. It is an economic crisis, a social crisis, and a human crisis that is fast becoming a human rights crisis. What does it take for us to recognize this and respond as if we were truly all in this together? Are we ready then to go back and fetch what we forgot? In times of great stress, we all manage our challenges with varying degrees of resilience or surrender. We may seek solace in our communities or our faith. We may practice basic decency and the sharing of responsibility, but we may also attempt to practice denial, get caught up in substance misuse, or acting out our anger and despair with and upon each other. UNICEF reminds us of this universal crisis. Children are not the face of this pandemic, but they risk being among its biggest victims, as children's lives are nonetheless being changed in profound ways. So the critical components of compassionate and an obstructive response, forgive me, are maintaining the safety of our own environments. We have to be careful about the spread of COVID as we go about our daily business. This means we have to understand and again separate fact from fiction. We have to make sure that we have the resources that are needed to practice good hygiene, to keep ourselves safe, and to keep ourselves from being vectors of the disease. to do it consistently. We have to sustain consistent supervision so that we have the opportunity to reach out to trusted others when we are overwhelmed, even temporarily, with our own distress. And we have to consider the factors that drive inequality and increased vulnerability to this illness. We won't always be going back to the familiar in the future, but we need to resist the tendency to surrender to fatigue, to remember the distance we've come and the progress that we've made, and to care for ourselves as we attempt to care for others on the path ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Dr. Abel for quite a sobering, but not in a bad way, kind of sobering presentation about not being afraid to go back and to collect and to get what we may have forgotten we had. And I think that is just such a powerful, powerful reminder. Your reflections on the HIV pandemic, which you are absolutely right is not over, and it's moved to another place. It's another point in its own emergence, I think. But there is a lot that we gained through journeying through that, and there's so much relevance now. I think yes, we are living. I wrote down what you said. We're living in a traumatized era, and that too creates a tremendous opportunity to remember that we've journeyed through trauma before. And there is so much that we learned and we gained. So we lost a lot, and we will lose some more before we get to a point where we can feel safe again. But there is so much that we have already. I think that there's a lot that we have that we can use, and I'm really, I think that is a big and important message. There. And then after 150 years, Sister Aline, 150 years, we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. We know that there is a lot of learning that has happened along the way. I'm just take 1 minute of something that happened when I was at St. Dominic's, when a young child died one public holiday, fell from a tree where he went to pick some fruit, and he died. Otis Small was his name. And in some months after, we were doing, and Sister Arlene would remember that, we were doing an evaluation, talking to the children about, doing an assessment of, their life in St. Dominic's and asking them. And I remember a young boy who, unfortunately, he has also now passed, I understand. Hassani Thomas was his name at the time. And I asked Hassani, what was the happiest day of your life? And Hassani said something about when his mommy came and so on and so on. And I asked him, what was the saddest day of your life? And he said, the day Otis died. And through that revelation, I remembered thinking, oh my gosh, we really had not worked with these children through the grief of losing one of their own. And I remember that was such a, and there was an opportunity, of course. It wasn't lost. We hadn't done it, doesn't mean that the opportunity was lost, that we could in fact go back to that and talk to these children about loss and about grief. And so many of them were there and they saw this happen. So just as you were talking, that image came so strongly to mind. So thank you for that. Friends, continue please to put your questions in the chat. We have Katisha who is feeding me the questions that we have and the opportunity to discuss with our panel as we go. Continue to do very well. We are racing forward to towards our next presentation, and it really is a great honor for me to introduce my dearest friend and colleague, Ms. Michelle Sogren, who's going to talk with us about reflective practice. Michelle has been a social work practitioner and educator for several decades. She has worked in the field of mental health with children, adolescents, and adult populations. Her research work continued with this population and focused on children and families in situations of domestic violence, migration, HIV/AIDS, and substance abuse. And let me tell you, those 6 lines do not capture the fullness of the experience and the wisdom that Ms. Sogren holds, and she will share with us some of that in her presentation this morning. So, Michelle, where are you? There you are. Let me hand over to you.
Thank you, Karen, for that warm introduction. And thank you, Sister Arlene, for inviting me to be a part of this very special event. Before I start the presentation, I must offer sincere congratulations to the founding sisters, the current sisters, Sister Arlene, manager of St. Dominic's Children's Home, the staff of St. Dominic's Children's Home, and all of the residents on this remarkable achievement. This is an outstanding milestone.
All right, we'll
Well done. You're not hearing me?
Yes, hearing you clearly. Thank you.
And now to the presentation. So I may need some guidance here, but I will try.
Click share screen.
I did that.
And now you select, there you go. The presentation, where is the, right, the presentation that you want should be open.
Should be, but it's not.
You need
Yes.
to, yes, you have it.
Mm-hmm.
It's loading.
Yeah, right.
Beautiful.
Yep. Are you seeing it?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Stunning, yes.
I
Good.
have called this presentation Truth in Action. And that is because the title of these series of anniversary seminars, Veritas Forum, was deliberately chosen, I'm sure. For fundamental to the philosophy of the Dominican order is the virtue of truth. 150 years ago, the Dominican sisters saw the truth, lived the truth, and built on that truth. And St. Dominic's Children's Home was born. Over the course of its existence, St. Dominic's Children's Home has had several reincarnations, including a name change. From orphanage to children's home. This immediately signaled an intention to refocus and repurpose. Changes in its philosophy, operational style, and care delivery practices quickly followed. The emphasis on solely providing custodial care gradually shifted and waned, and focused on positive, common sense parenting, psychological and behavioral rehabilitation, the development of technical and life skills, and family reunification was introduced. This meant, therefore, that the skill sets of the staff had to be carefully reviewed in the hiring process. Self-knowledge, use of self, and reflective practice assumed greater significance in the profile of the service providers. Why, you may ask, how are these concepts connected to childcare? What do they even mean in the context of childcare provision? So let's explore these concepts briefly. Getting a little problems here with the clicking. Khalil Gibran, on the topic of self-knowledge, said, the self is a sea, boundless and measureless. Seek to find a truth, not the truth. The soul unfolds itself like a lotus of countless petals. This suggests that gaining self-knowledge is a lifelong process, ably assisted by regular engagement in self-awareness and self-reflection practices, and the development of optimal emotional intelligence. It is a fair assumption, I think, that many of the children in care have experienced trauma in varying degrees of intensity, types, and duration. Their behaviors, emotional responses, communication patterns, problem-solving skills, social and interactional skills would have been shaped by these experiences. Likewise, the behaviors, reactions, interactions, etc. of the care providers have also been influenced and shaped by their childhood and adult life experiences and histories. This notwithstanding professional education and training. We know only too well that we are prone to adopt our default positions when feelings of being threatened, challenged, or undermined arise. What can mitigate these circumstances? Self-awareness, self-knowledge, that is a truth, reflective practice, and emotional intelligence. These are proven tools for maximizing the effectiveness of our interactions and care delivery. All of the care providers at St. Dominic's Children's Home and other care facilities are constantly engaged in social interactions with the children and co-workers. They are constantly engaged in situations that influence, affect, and effect changes, growth, development, and success. Being tuned in is critical to this process. Tuned in to our feelings, to how certain situations affect our emotions and our reactions. Tuned into our triggers and blind spots. Being conscious of how our behavior impacts others and how the behavior of others impact us. These lie at the heart of reflective practice. So let's look briefly at emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is understood to mean the capacity to effectively handle one's emotions and one's responses to the emotions of others. It means having the capacity to recognize our own feelings and those of others. Being able to manage emotions in ourselves and our relationships. Being able to motivate ourselves. It means being aware of one's feelings, why these feelings are being experienced at any given time, and the implications of those feelings. In other words, being able to identify, label, correct, or adjust our emotions. This is enlightenment versus operating in a fog, an emotional fog, not being able to recognize one's feelings, running the risk of being insensitive to the position and feelings of others, responding inappropriately to others. Emotional self-control, self-management, self-confidence, self-assessment, emotional regulation are critical skills and competencies of emotional intelligence. Reflective practice. Meaningful reflective practice relies on a healthy mix of self-awareness and emotional intelligence. In social work, the practitioner is encouraged to reflect in practice and on practice. In practice, that is being able to identify, label, correct, or adjust our feelings and responses during our interactions with others. At St. Dominic's Children's Home, interactions may be, for example, therapeutic interviews or interventions with the children, organizing and scheduling activities and routines in the household, conducting supervisory sessions with the care staff. Reflection on practice calls for a replay of the tape, a review of the interactions of the sessions. Questions like these may have: what was the tone, the mood, the content, the ebb and flow of the interaction? What was the outcome? Was this the intended outcome? What led to this outcome? How did my feelings or lack thereof influence the outcome? How am I feeling now, etc.? So let's try now to locate and actionize these concepts within the portals and operations of St. Dominic's Children's Home. The principles of the Steppers model frame and guide the trajectory of the home's mission, mandate, and goals. The first E in this model refers to the ecological system, the person in the environment. If we were to accept the concept of the self creating the environment as proposed by our own sister Arlene, who is also the architect of the Steppers model, I add, then we must also accept that a reasonably healthy self is required. Why? Many of the children in care have for most of their lives experienced unhealthy, unfair, inequitable environments. So the clear mandate of the home and the care providers is to create an environment that promotes and supports healthy transitions through their developmental stages, maturation, and functional healing. A very tall order indeed. In fact, that goal is as difficult and as complex as developing self-knowledge, self-awareness, etc. What may assist in guiding these processes is reflective supervision. Essentially, reflective supervision actively engages the concepts discussed earlier, situates them in relation to the roles, functions, and tasks of the practitioners and service providers, and professionally guides the exercises in reflective practice. So how can reflective practice steer this process towards a truth? To answer that question, I submit that the focus of or goals of reflective supervision, I was saying reflective practice, reflective supervision. The focus on goals of the reflective supervision can be to facilitate in-depth review of the status of the residents and their current profiles in relation to their individual care plans, stimulate critical analysis of intervention strategies, management techniques, outcome, and future plans, assist with assessment of achievements and challenges and the creation of solutions, execute guided debriefing where indicated, and the processing of feelings, thoughts, reactions, and expectations, facilitate exploration and assessment of the practitioners' relationships and interactions with colleagues, co-workers, and management, examine their understanding of the philosophy, goals, operational principles of St. Dominic's Children's Home, and their feelings and reactions towards these. Guide honest appraisal of their professional preparedness, development, and practice. And very importantly, help to identify specific self-care and safety plans. Discuss plans for continued education and professional training. Ideally, Reflective supervision should aim to facilitate a milieu for growth and knowledge. That is a truth. It is meant to help the practitioner to understand how they work, to gauge the impact of their roles, etc., and to challenge, explore, and test their creativity. Yet another tall order. Mistrust, disenchantment with the job, the home itself, and management. Personal unease with looking at and discussing self and feelings can be challenging barriers to this process. The very notion of self-knowledge may be discarded and its importance rejected outright, pretty much like the COVID vaccine. There may be reluctance to engage in and commit to the process. Therefore, creativity, competence, flexibility, patience, and a high level of self-awareness and comfort with self are vital skills that the facilitator should possess. That's my view anyway. The children in care at St. Dominic's Children's Home understandably may be searching for, trying to define and make sense of that self and the truth about that self. Of necessity, their living environment, their ecological space must thus be created to facilitate some success in that quest for truth. In this context, how that environment is designed, crafted, and maintained depends on several factors. The vision of the establishment, the willingness of the care providers to take the leap of faith and adapt to trending childcare practices in executing their ever-evolving roles, duties, functions, including, and importantly, participating in reflective supervisory sessions. Administrative and financial support from external partners. A cohesive, collaborative, and consistent coexistence among other agencies charged with the welfare of our children. Let us help them to reach their truth. Thank you and congratulations again.
Thank you very, very, very much to Ms. Sobran for her stirring presentation that took us on a bit of a journey, starting with the core of
I'm not seeing you, Carrie. I'm
you're not seeing me?
What?
Well, you're seeing yourself for right now. They probably happen. You don't have to do anything. I think it's just where the host. It's the host to manage that. Yes. Okay. So you're okay.
Not me.
But I can see you, which is very important.
Okay.
As all of us. So there, you see me now?
Yeah.
Good. Taking us on this journey, starting with where St. Dominic started with a commitment to truth and what truth means, and moving us away from thinking about the truth to each of our own truths and a truth about what it is we are trying to do, and then linking that to this process of reflective practice, being willing to face our own truth about who we are, what brought us into this work, how we respond to people, how people respond to us, and how we can adjust ourselves as the professionals in the role, and then moving us to some insights about reflective supervision, and then reflective caregiving, in which there is this, what I would consider kind of a symbiotic relationship between me and myself, me as a professional, me in relation to my colleagues and my supervisor, and how the supervisor works with me to ensure that I continue to do the best I can. And then the relationship with the children who are also on a journey that while we may not be able to relate to it, it may be unfamiliar to us, we are certainly in it with them. And we may not be able to change their past, but we can certainly change their present. But we can only do that with a certain amount of consciousness, willingness to look, willingness to recognize the truth. And so it is through the process of reflective practice and reflective supervision that we are able to move the steppers model into reality, to build it, and it will grow. And we must always be looking at what we are doing in that regard, and continuing to face the truth, some truths about what that means. So colleagues, at I think a really good point, we have come to the end of our formal presentations. And the rest of our time together, the next could be as long as 40-45 minutes, is for you, the participants, to get a chance to share, to have your questions addressed. We will begin by looking at some of the questions that have already been posed in the chat. I'm going to put some of those questions out there. Just by way of overview, all of our presentations are really about I'm going to borrow a word that has come, a reimagining of St. Dominic's Children's Home. And all of these parts certainly fit into that new vision in the context of the realities within which we live. And so your contributions are a very, very important part of this process. So if I can ask for Romario to please unspotlight me so that we can have everybody in a gallery, can try and have everybody in a gallery view so that we can all see each other. How possible is that? Let's see. Yes, I'm able to see almost everybody who's out there. If we can do so, that would be wonderful. So then we're in this engaged conversation. And so we begin the question and answer segment. Again, continue to put your questions in the chat. And Katisha is going to help me to ensure that all the questions are asked. So let's begin with the first question. We always have an opportunity to talk about money, and we did have some conversation already around finances. So our first question then to all presenters: in the face of declining financial resources, what opportunities exist, or how can we fully implement this continuum of care within the current context of Trinidad and Tobago at this time? What do we think about finances and financial capabilities to be able to implement the continuum of care? So Jackie, can I ask you to kick us off, since was your presentation, maybe make sure I have it right, in which you talked about the continuum of care. You'll have to turn on your mic. You're currently muted.
Thank you. Please rewind the question for me. I heard a lot in there about funding and different things, and so a more specific question, please.
It's really about how can we, how do we finance this? How, yes, how do we financially make this happen?
Right. Well, the first thing we did, and I put that on one of the slides, was instead of creating new programs, we mapped out what we already did, you know, and we put it in an organization or in a template that said, oh, we're already doing parent training. We're already doing aftercare. We're already involved in this. And so instead of creating something, we put it all down. What are we doing currently? And then, of course, you vet it out, convene a work group, look at gap analysis, what might be the different things, what are, but I think it is just to look at what we're doing and doing it well in terms of funding. I want to shy away from any funding that might be specific to St. Dominic's or there in Trinidad and Tobago. I don't think I can answer that. But I think if you look at the resources you've got right now, you would be surprised at what you have. It just needs to be organized and labeled and supported, funding. It's very important when you do program evaluation. There's an administrative part, there's a consultation part, there's a I have to go back to the slide, evaluation. You don't want to continue programs that aren't as successful, that you don't want to throw money in areas that are not working as well as others. You want to look at casting a big net always, how can we do prevention and community services and still provide that individual services that children need. I'm going all around it, but I guess to answer the question would be, instead of going out to to invent things, look at what you've got, look at what you do well, see what you need to highlight, see if you only have this many dollars, where can you get maximum? We've spoken a little bit about evidence-based practices. We don't want to just do things cheaply. We want to do them well. We want children to be maintained. And so, aftercare, we do not, like John says, stretch our workers too thin. We don't want to say, okay, everybody, now you're going to do 2 jobs. That would not be a good source of funding. So we want to maximize not just our program efficiency, but also our workers. How are they doing it? What responsibility can we give to the families? What can they do? What part can they play in the role, of financing things? Being creative. Neil's on, using social work interns, using some other services, some other supports, being creative with public and private and thinking outside the box sometimes. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that's one that may be specific to each of your programs you might want to just really look at.
Thank you very much for that, Jackie. I see, sister, and I think you certainly kicked off the conversation about maximizing resources. Sister Arlene?
Yeah, I like that piece with the maximizing resources. And I think one of the things that we have been in as we grapple with our own issues around the declining finances and having to find alternative sources of funding is you need to prioritize to also optimize the resources you do have, like Jackie just said, and to innovate, and so to me it is how can we do that? And one of the things that, and I know I think I see Cooper Children's Home here, so I don't know if Beverly is on, but I know, for example, the Children's Homes Association, for years we've been trying to facilitate that kind of collaborative work within and between children's homes. So exactly that, what each of us do best, we can do, and therefore by sharing and engaging each other and collaboration, cost sharing resources, by doing that as children's homes residential childcare providers. If only we could move ourselves into that kind of a space, I think we would be able to overcome some of the resource type issues, including the financial one, So I think this dispensation, certainly finance is one of the major challenges that we're going to be facing because we trying to implement that continuum of care. But to do so, I think we can only do so if we really work together. And so collaboration, I think, is a key piece. But we also know that there are obstacles to collaboration. So that is probably the next conversation, one of the conversations we have to have moving forward.
Thank you, Sister Arlene. John, can I also pull you into the conversation, because you did have quite a lot around in your presentation around finances and economic considerations?
Yeah, sure. When I saw the question came in, my first reaction was, oh boy, well, how do you answer that? There's never enough money. And then as I started to jot down notes, I wrote down most of the things that Sister Arlene and Jackie have already shared. So just to emphasize, I think there are really two ways, right? When you talk about finances, you can do more with what you have, or you can increase the amount of financing that you get. And so I think a lot of Jackie's comments really spoke to the how do you do more, right? How do we evaluate the impact? How do we be more efficient? How can we use technology? I know Jackie didn't mention it, but she's worked a lot with Sister Arlene on bringing in some technological means that could streamline staff responsibilities, facilitate communication. So I think those are all important ways to look. And then Sister Arlene really spoke to how do we get out of the crisis? How do we plan? How do we set goals? How do we anticipate funding changes that might be coming instead of just reacting to them? So I think all of those are very important. And then just to piggyback on Michelle's comments, I think reflective practice is a huge investment in time. So it takes more time up front, it makes more time to roll it out, but then you get a huge dividend of time back because staff are more empowered, they're better at their jobs, parents are more empowered, people have less questions. And so I think over the long term, reflective practice is really a great efficiency. Then the other one is looking at securing more resources. So one of the things we've seen here is that, as Sister mentioned, the average age has continued to go up here. The level of need for the children coming into care has continued to go up. But going back to my analogy, we've started to recognize that the emotions are so tied into the behaviors, and insurance has become a much bigger funder, right? We have a lot of our treatment programs here in Florida are funded through federal insurance agencies, basically. And so people have recognized that if we're going to care for the whole individual, that includes mental health, that includes behavioral treatment. And so that is another possible way to increase funding, I think. I stopped. I think did I lose you? I think I've contributed. I'd love to hear from some of the participants.
Sorry about that. All of a sudden I couldn't unmute my mic. Yes. Oh. Thank you very much for that, John. And I think in yours, what Sister Arlene was saying, and also what Jackie was saying, what you know, that change does not necessarily require a whole lot of money. At the same time, you know, sometimes people think that, you know, once we trying to save money, that they have to do more, and that may be true to some degree, but certainly not for us to believe that we have to overwork people or double work people in order to save money, because then we're going to end up burning people out, and that brings a whole other. So let me some of the participants, please, anybody out there has a response on this idea about how do we make the best use of the resources that we have to make these changes happen or to improve what we do. Any thoughts? I'm looking for a hand, a face, a smile, somebody who looks like they're going to see something. I'm seeing anybody? There must be somebody wanting to share. St. Martin's. I don't know who is behind the St. Martin's hand, but I welcome you. Thank you. Just unmute your mic.
Good morning, all.
Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
but just barely. You're a little low.
Oh, all right. One sec. Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better. Thank you so much. Just let us know who you
Yes.
are. Thank you.
Hi, Alex Ramirez.
Hello,
Hi.
Alex.
Yes. One thing. Well, this is just one suggestion that I have in terms of maximizing resources. A lot of these staff or a lot of the workers that we have here or in any institution, they themselves might have some knowledge or some skill or some ability that may be beneficial to the institution. So if they'll be willing to give up their time and their ability, that could also be one way that we could help in terms of the cutting finances and to maximize resources that we do have.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for that, Alex. You mean like origami? You think I don't remember?
No. I know you remember, miss. But yes, no, but not all through origami. A lot of the services that we provide, some of the workers or many of the workers might have some insight into it. So even if we may not be able to do a full program or at least something of that regard, we could get information, we can help source the resources that we would need, because somebody I know might be willing to come and do a program or help in some way, and they might do that as a voluntary something for the home or the institution.
Yes, I think that's So you mean that we use our networks, we use our skills, our resources, and also to create an environment in which that is welcome, that people are encouraged to do so, that people want to share what they know and to make contacts with other people and to bring in who they have and what they know to enrich the environment. Thank you very much for that, Alex. I think that's a very rich contribution. Beverly, good morning. Beverly?
Morning, everyone.
Beverly, hello.
Hi, I just found the mic. First of all, I would just like to seriously compliment St. Dominic's Children's Home for putting on this Veritas forum. And I would like to thank them for inviting me to be present at this session. So far, it has been excellent. So far, the presentations have all been on point. Just to say, but I am the chairman of Couva Children's Home. Okay, so it's another community residence. I just want to say that the community residences that provide residential care for children all do not operate at the same level of financial independence, financial competence, if you want to say, okay? We are at different levels. But the commonality is that the community residences all have a responsibility to the children in care. And I endorse what Sister Arlene said about the sharing of resources. Couva Children's Home, we have had the honor of benefiting from some of the training programs that St. Dominic's have put on. We can't afford to put it on. So that the homes that have the resources to run these programs can invite other homes to participate in the program. I would like to know, I'm quite prepared to come and sit with St. Dominic's and get more information on the Steppers program. We are trying to implement the residential care along the continuum of care. But of course, we have to look for our financing to run some of these intervention programs, and they are very expensive.
Yeah.
There has to be some way, since the Children's Authority is now the guardian of all the children in care, there has to be some way where the services, and I'm not talking about grants, that the government can provide can be synchronized and harmonized and made easily available to these children's community residences. And the services have to be realistic and consistent. It cannot be one counseling session every 6 weeks. That will not work. A lot of the points were made about treating each child individually in accordance with their care plan. So we have some work to do in Trinidad. We can start the work among the community residences by sharing what we have, by opening what we have to others. And that's a really good point. And we have to do some advocacy because we have to get other people on board.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Beverly. And maybe times are changing, that we have a lot of more, maybe greater intent. Maybe the connectivity across the world has made us a little bit more receptive to ideas about partnership and collaboration and working together, and not always seeing ourselves in competition with others because we're competing for the same pool of resources or some other thing. Maybe this is the time for us now to break down those barriers between ourselves as service providers, etc., and to begin to build more than bridges, build more than bridges. Mrs. Acosta, her hand is raised. I know we do have a couple other questions in the chat to pose, but in relation to the current conversation.
Good morning, everyone. Are you hearing me? Are you all hearing me?
Yes, hearing you clearly.
Right. Good morning, everyone. I would just like to comment and kind of endorse what Ms. Beverly said in reference to where we're talking about advocacy on behalf of our children. And it is so vital that in the advocacy, if we can, as she said, we could all rally the community residents, for want of a better word, kind of pressure. And I mean this pressure in a very positive way. Pressure our children guardians, CAT, because we are our children voices. And if we can do that, it means that social policies can be changed to include the community residents in reference to we ourselves being able to access training for our children. And then we're talking about, and then correct me if I'm wrong, somebody spoke about inclusive of the family also, because if we are talking about changing the trajectory of our children's lives, we have to do that, including the family unit as much as possible, because we can work with our children for as long as we can, for as long as they are sent to us. But when we work with our children, and when I say we work with them holistically to develop their self-esteem, to develop their self-worth, to facilitate their empowerment, and if for somehow along the line, the family is not inclusive of these changes, it can be defeating the purpose to some extent, as well as it can be positive. So when we are talking about advocacy and advocating for our children, we need to look at it also from a social policy perspective, also where the community residents could really benefit, and it doesn't have to be in monetary. It could be in skill training, etc., etc. That's my contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Acosta, for that, for those insights. Absolutely, there are all kinds of ways that we can share our resources and to learn from each other. So I thank you very much for that. I'm going to pose a second question that came through on the chat. Strength in numbers. How do we apply that maxim to how we work in this new dispensation? And I do think that that question builds on the conversation that we were just having about working together. However, let me pose this to Neil, and to ask Neil to consider for us how we can maximize the idea of strength in numbers.
That may be a slight stretch for me, but let me start it this way and say that when we recognize what we have in common with those with whom we are both working and serving, we soften the boundaries between us that can lead to the sort of tensions and competitions that promote some of the stresses that I hear being described in financing and in the sharing of resources. Part of this notion of pandemic being a great equalizer is that it makes more vivid the degree to which all of us are to some degree vulnerable to the challenges of living, to the struggles and the pains of facing traumatic circumstances with resilience rather than resistance or denial. And so for me, strength in numbers is enhanced by the notion of compassion that is generated in part by recognizing our common basis, recognizing that we are parts of communities which are confronted with challenges that may seem on their surface to impact us in different ways, depending on our strata in the community, our income, the degree of responsibility that others expect of us. But if we recognize that underneath that, we are all seeking balanced lives, we are seeking stability, we are seeking the opportunity for unity with those in and around our homes and our families and communities, it softens a barrier of tension that may otherwise undermine strength in numbers. And similarly, we've talked in various ways this morning about mindfulness without using that word quite so much. But the notion of a benevolent ecosystem embraces both this strength in community where we share our talents and our concerns with each other with openness and honesty. There's Veritas for you again. But even more challenging sometimes is bringing forward an honest presentation of ourselves when we find that our feelings, our thoughts, our reactions, some of the things that Mrs. Sogren referred to so clearly in her notions on reflective practice, when we come up short in regard to our own expectations for self, harshness and hiding are contrary to the notion of compassion and transparency and openness. So many of the things that have been talked about already this morning in terms of understanding our roots, seeing how they feed our branches, and recognizing that good supervision with compassionate and experienced colleagues all help us build this sense of community, which can, I hope, foster the strength in numbers that you're referring to.
Thank you very much for that, Neil. I think this it is about creating a sense of community, isn't it? And what being a community and being part of a community means. You know, the academic definition of community speaks to persons who share something in common with which they identify, and that which connects them in some way. And the first thing that comes there is the ability to identify what those things are, that we are probably more alike than we are different. And some of the challenges we face are probably more common than they are disparate. But certainly your point about harshness and hiding and judgment and possibly, you know, a reluctance to look at, you know, to see the truth can be quite contradictory to creating this sense of community. And unfortunately, we do have a tradition of being sometimes pretty harsh with ourselves and therefore with each other around, especially things to do with emotion and difficulty and difficult circumstances. So I thank you very much for that. Building on that, Ms. Sogren, there is a direct question for you. And if Ms. Jackman would allow me, I'd like to divide the question, to pose the question in two parts, a little bit different. So Ms. Sogren, Ms. Jackman is asking, what would you recommend to employees working in community residences about with respect to peer support as it pertains to colleagues who may be having difficulty with reflectivity, with reflective practice, and with receiving, giving and receiving reflective supervision? I don't know what recommendations, what suggestions you may have for persons who may be challenged, facing some challenges. There's two sets of challenges: the people who are working with peers who are not, and then also the persons who might be struggling with reflective practice themselves. Your mic is off.
Yes, you know the dinosaur you're dealing with here.
Still
Yes.
talking?
What
Yes,
did you?
okay. I'm sorry, Yvette, you'll just need to mute your mic, please.
What did you said something about people working with peers? These are people, the peers who are open to reflective supervision.
So the question really is about challenges. How do we work? How do we work with colleagues who may be reluctant to engage in reflective practice?
Yeah, I could see Ms. Jackman asking that question. Yes. Let me back up a little bit. I do not know if Mrs. Jackman remembers, but when I did my little stint at St. Dominic's recently, one of the first daring things I did with the group at one of the homesteads was to have a kind of mini lab session, and this was at the request of the what do you call it, the house parent. And I got Sister Ali's permission, and she told me she wished she could be a fly on the wall to see that session. But much to my surprise and to theirs, it turned out very well, and they kept, you know, wanting more and wanting more and more, wanting more. And this, Corinne, is a form of peer support, because they, even though I facilitated the discussions and so, but they more or less led it, you know, and I was really hoping that we could have continued that, but then things, you know, took a different turn, and different things started to happen. But yes, having that, as I said, it is pretty much the challenge that the people in the Ministry of Health and other healthcare workers are having now with the COVID vaccine, getting people to come on board to understand. And yes, it is a tall order, as I've said, looking at self-query and going that route. And it can be almost devastating if there are some workers who are open to it and want to do that, and there are others who are blocking it. And as I said, pretty much like the vaccine, other workers who are for it may not want the others who are against it to know that they are for it, and so on and so on. I think it's really about building trust. As I said, I think the facilitator of these supervisory sessions and the skills and competencies of that person are key. You know, the creativity that I spoke about, their competence, their own comfort with self. Let's start there. Their own comfort with self, their own level of self-knowledge, their own level of emotional intelligence will can be an asset or should be an asset in facilitating successful supervisory sessions. And I think by and by, it may happen. As when I started with the ICPs that work with the individual care plans at St. Dominic back in whenever, not all of the house parents were on board with what Sister Aline asked me to do, but was my own mandate. And for each new meeting, I had to morph what I did after having, you know, had some sense of these people before me. So it took a lot of work even before we could start to work. You know, that getting to know you, what I can do, what I can offer, what they need. And as I said just now, Kevin, it really puts some comfort with self. That you can say, you tell me what you need. How can I come in here? I am in your territory. I don't know if this is getting anywhere near to what you were asking, Corinne. I don't know how this thing works, so help me here, Corinne.
Yes. You okay there, Corinne? Would you like to put on your mic and talk to us? Thank
Hi,
you.
good afternoon, everyone.
Hello. Morning.
Awesome program so far. I'm really enjoying. A lot is really inspiring, and it's lovely to hear all the presenters present. I asked the question because it's so important to deal with self. It's so important for us to understand self, even as we build relationship with others. And one of the key things that I heard John mention, he said that in the work that we do is based on relationship building and building authentic relationship. And so I just wanted, you know, further guidance to touch on the whole topic of how do we provide further peer support. And more so, I mean, I didn't put it in when I wrote my question, but I was also thinking about how can we communicate to our colleagues that they may very well need help. And I know Ms. Sugrim touched on it because she said it starts with building trust, which I do understand, but then sometimes even surpass that because persons are employed. How do you really help them? Because we are also, as Sister Aline indicated earlier, with this new dispensation, we have moved heavily into a legal framework. And so this impacts on how we care for children, and how we care for children, there's a legal aspect of it too. We will be held responsible for how we interact and engage with children and the things that we do because we model the type of behaviors that we want children to see. So I just wanted to know, just to talk, to just bring that up. How can we support each other? Because it's very important for us to understand and learn and know and continue the discussion about how we can support each other, because this environment that we work in is one that focuses heavily on the continued building relationship. And as Sister Aline always talk about the 3 C's, consistency, continuity, and collaboration. Well, how can we do that in an environment when there's mistrust, when mistrust may present itself, or when the multidisciplinary team, sometimes persons do not see eye to eye. And I heard all the presenters so far touched on that, and was really, really inspiring. But Ms. Sugrim, as usual, is always a blessing hearing you chat. Yeah, and you present. Yeah.
If I may, Karen,
Absolutely.
as I said at the start, and several, I think ventures in my presentation, this is a process and a lengthy one at that. Fortunately, at your workplace at St. Dominic's, Karine, you will engage an employee assistance program. So to address one of the direct questions you ask if somebody is obviously in need of help, the supervisor can use his or her authority to refer. Well, I'm not sure the exact line of authority at the home, so I may be speaking off the truth, but there would be somebody at the home that can refer this individual to an employee assistance program for any kind of whatever kind of function or is required. Similarly, during the peer sessions, and of course peer support sessions can take various forms, and it can be 2 people, a group, and so on. In the peer session, peers, depending on the level of trust and how the people are paired, P-A-I-R-E-D, here, the need for help can also be pointed out by a peer, depending on the kind of relationship. So yes, absolutely, relationship building, that is where we need to start. But it is not going to be easy at all by any means. And it's certainly engagement in this process cannot be forced and mandated. Otherwise it will lose its purpose. Yeah. But it does work, because I've seen it work. It does work. But it takes some time, and it really needs to be consistently consistently ingrained in the operations of the home.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Ms. Sovereign, and absolutely right. And creating, and I think I'm just to add that it's creating it's a cultural shift, reflective practice, reflective supervision, helping children to become more reflective about their own selves and what they do and how what they do impacts other people. And that's a whole shift, and it may not be limited to the context of the home. It is really about all of us. I mean, COVID certainly provides an opportunity for us to reflect more about ourselves and about how we live and etc. And and I'm hearing this. I remember again 20+ years ago, one of the first sets of trainings, we had gone down to Shagaramas on a training, and I remember us having some really, really profound conversations about how this kind of work, working with children, working in a domicile setting, working with people who are traumatized, etc., how it puts us face to face with our own upbringing, our own needs, our own personal issues. It really touches us in quite a personal way, and that requires that we see ourselves and manage ourselves in a particular kind of way. I remember hearing so many times 20 years ago, staff people talking about, when I was young, or I raised my children not for all, yet to come here to be rude to me, because it really confronts us with some of our own beliefs and our own realities, and how important it is for us to be able to reflect on that and to note the differences. Sister Arlene, I note your hand.
Yes. It just a thought though, sometimes negotiating the chasm across that shift is really huge for some people, And as we move into this new dispensation, it just strikes me that, especially I suppose, particularly in the context of St. Dominic's Children's Home, where we've actually seen it, where we have actually had to negotiate our way out of a particular relationship. That it may also entail counseling people out of an environment, because in some cases, people might just not be equipped to make that shift, So I think it's a painful part of any transition, any change or transition process. You know, Neil, I was particularly struck when Neil spoke about that whole thing of using the experience of HIV/AIDS and what it demanded of human services, and the need and how central the ability to see the client, the person who's sitting before us, to see that person as a brother or sister and not as the other. I mean, I think Neil used the phrase the other, you know? And when we keep the person as the other, the client as the other, it's really easy to assume, because of that relationship where the client is the other, it's really easy to divorce ourselves from the process. But when we can see the person before us, the children who become before us and their families, as you know, members of our communities, a possible brother or sister, uncle or aunt, you know, or even when we ourselves have had the experience, you know, I remember very early in the COVID-19 pandemic, my family, we lost a loved one, you know, and it brought the whole thing so close to home. And I think people in the environment currently may be open to making that journey, or may not, because it does, as I think Neil said, or someone said, it does confront us with a measure of our own vulnerability, and people may not be ready to go there. But I also have to agree with Mrs. Jackman that at the end of the day, we are operating within a legal framework, and there's certain things we have to do, you know, and therefore that tension, you know, of helping ourselves, giving as the new systems emerge, being patient with ourselves as the thing unfolds, that also has to be held in tension with the reality that we do have to meet those standards of consistency, continuity, and collaboration. So that tension and having to manage that tension, sometimes you're going to have to counsel people out of the environment, you know. So I think that too is something that we have to bring to this conversation, not today, but certainly that's something that we certainly have to be mindful of. And how do we do that, you know? Yeah.
Thank you very, very much, Sister Arlene. Friends, we have just another 5 minutes if there are any other thoughts, but what I think we would like to do just in these last minutes is to think about action, is think about actioning and bringing some of this into, you know, to actuality. How do we move from this point where we have so much rich conversation, so many suggestions, and about moving the thing forward. So whatever suggestions you may have, anybody with any thoughts about how, please, because in the interest of time, we may not have time to have the conversation about all, but just to please drop them in the chat, to make sure and drop them in the chat. Jackie, I saw your hand, and then back to Sister Arlene.
They should be hands clapping, not just a hands raising. So thank you, everybody. I want to go back to balance. You know, how we started the conversation, balancing child safety and permanency with child well-being. And I think it's the same with professional development and program development. I'm a clinician, and so I probably would have taken a different spin on Neil's answer when you said strengths in numbers. As a clinician, I count everything. We count staff retention. If we have a parent class, were there 2 people in the parenting class? Were there 20 people in the parenting class? And if only 2, is that because we offered it during the daytime and parents were working? Or did we offer it in an obscure area where there was not a bus route and people couldn't get to it? So maximizing resources also has to do with counting numbers. As a clinician, you know, you're counting, Johnny had 15 tantrums last month, but this month he only has 5. They might be whoppers, but we're making progress, you know? So we're always counting. I think when things get contentious, for me, it's always going back to the child plan. You know, what's in the best interest of the child? If everybody had a place at that table, including the children, direct staff and professional staff, all the staff, into the input of that child plan, they're more apt to carry that out. And so when things or personalities get a little crazy, sometimes going back, what is in that care plan for that child? And let's keep that at the focus. And I know that's so hard, but it does take reflective practice. It does take trust. It does take partnership, but keeping that child center. So I think you're well on your way, and so look forward to seeing what you do with all this. So thank you.
Mr. Arlene, your hand was raised. Yes.
In terms of action, I would like to commit, once Beverly is committed, to us having that meeting, Beverly, so that we can see how together we might be able to take this forward in terms of sharing resources in some way.
Yes, I'm not sure who's behind Benign Health, but your hand is raised. Beverly, are you still here? Yes.
I'm on board. I'm on board,
On
sister.
board.
I'm
So
very on board.
Okay, there's a plan there. So Benign?
Yes, good afternoon. It's afternoon already. Okay,
Nearly.
so I would like to echo Ms. Beverly's views on the invitation, and which is very interesting and informative. I would like to add to the transitioning of St. Dominic's. I've been with you guys for a while, and I've seen a lot of changes, both in the legal aspect with it's child-centered and also with actually doing the self-care, which Mrs. Jackman is big on that. Based on all of that, drawn into consideration with his connective influence with thought, cognitive influence with thought and emotional feeling and stuff, these things all come into play with the self-care aspect of it, because when you are well, then you can help others, right? Also, I see it as a collective connectivity with compassion and humility paired with the legal aspect of it. I think if we take it from that aspect, I think we would be well on our way to good outcomes.
Thank you very, very much for that summary, and we are certainly connecting the dots across these presentations. So thank you very much for that. So friends, in the last minute, I would like to add my own congratulations to St. Dominic's, to Sister Arlene at the helm for this forum. I want to pass you over, please, to Miss Alana Shanklin. Miss Shanklin skillfully coordinated this event and is trying to coordinate the establishment of the Veritas Center. So I want to hand over to Miss Shanklin, who's just going to bring us to a close with some thank yous.
Thanks, Karine. Well, first I would like to formally introduce Dr. Karine De Caries. So Dr. De Caries is a lecturer in social work at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. She started her social work career as a welfare officer at the St. Dominic's Children's Home, which gave her a strong foundation and further strengthened her interest in residential services and care for children and youth in need of care and protection. She went on to pursue higher education and commits herself to professional socialization, education, and training of social workers, and helping other helping professionals who have safeguarding responsibilities for the most disadvantaged members of society. So on saying that, I would really like to express our thanks to Dr. Caries.
Just waiting to bring their views or impose their views on you in a way that you did not.
Ms. John.
Beverly, can you mute your mic, please? Sorry about that.
Yes, sorry, yes, thanks. So it is my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. On behalf of the St. Dominic's Children's Home, I would like to extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all our participants who have blessed us with their presence and took out valuable time of their busy schedule. So to Dr. Abel, to Jackie, to Karine, to John, to Michelle, I didn't leave out anyone else. Sister Arlene, of course. Sister Arlene will get a special thanks. Yes, so I would really, really like to thank you all for taking time out. I know planning was very short, but you all have came through very, very well, and you all were really, really brilliant in your sharing of all this information with us today. I will also like to extend a special thanks to Sister Arlene for inspiring us to come together and put this panel discussion, this Veritas Forum in action. I know as part of the 150th Jubilee celebrations, this is our second event, and I must say it's wonderful, and I must let everyone know that this is the first of further discussions that we will be having with everyone. I would like to thank all of the participants who came out of their time today, their schedules to be here, to share, to have conversations with us, and to offer insight on what's happening on their end. So we on our end, we will be able to come together and have further discussions to bring everything together, you know, in this new dispensation. So no program can become successful with one person. So again, I extend my big thanks to everyone here today for their support. Special thanks to Ms. Langine for taking time out from her duties this morning to come and be our chat co-host and chat moderator today. Thank you so much. And thank you guys for making this event such a successful one, because without your contribution, this will not be so. So again, I would like to thank everyone. I want to pray that all of you have a blessed day. Go with God and be safe out there. So again, on behalf of St. Dominic's Children's Home, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shanklin. And all that's left for me to do is to congratulate Sister Arlene on her vision, on her humble leadership, her commitment to learning and growing for herself, as well as for the organization, as well for her colleagues, and of course for the children of St. Dominic's and the children of Trinidad and Tobago by extension. So it is my pleasure. I have looked across this audience and seen so many friends, so many people with whom I work, so many people with whom I smile. Sister Renee, I see you. I'm so happy you turned on your camera. And I feel like I have new friends as we leave this space, but not leave the work. Not leave the work behind in this space. This has been a really tremendous, tremendous event. I think the recording of this event should be made available, I don't know, to UETV or somebody, so that we can share components of this with the wider society. So I too add my prayers of blessing on all of you, my thanks, but also that you will continue to be safe and well wherever you are, and I look forward to other opportunities. Thanks again for the chance, and everybody, to enjoy the rest of your day and have a wonderful week. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
We'll be in touch. We'll be in touch.
Yes,
Thanks.
we will.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.